This morning, I went and got a haircut. Thank you for noticing. And my barber did a lovely job. I'm going to the same woman for a few years now because, as you know, once you find somebody you like who knows how to cut your hair, you should stick with them and keep going to them all the time. So she does a great job cutting my hair. She lets me know very discreetly when the eyebrows are getting a little bushy. And most importantly, the thing that makes her a great barber is that she doesn't talk to me that much. When I'm getting my hair cut, I don't want to get into a whole conversation. I want to sit down, get the job done, and get out. So this morning, I'm sitting there in the barber chair, getting my hair cut, listening to her clippers going and watching the cable news on TV, and out of nowhere, she says to me, "You know, I've been cutting your hair for a few years now, and I don't think I've ever asked you, what do you do for a living?" And now I have to find a new barber. Because the thing is, and I'll look to my senior colleagues in the congregation as well, when you're a rabbi or a minister or a priest or whatever, we dread it when some well-meaning person asks us what they think is the most innocent question. You're sitting on an airplane, buckling in for a 4-hour flight, and the person next to you leans over and smiles brightly and says, "So what do you do for a living?" Now, the worst case scenario when that question is asked, and I tell them that I'm a rabbi, is that they can't wait to spend the next 4 hours on that plane telling me about their religious life or their favorite passage from Jeremiah or whatever it is, and I just want to put on my headphones and do my crossword puzzle. But the second worst case scenario is what happened this morning, which is when they say the following line, which is what my barber said to me this morning. "I'm a rabbi," I said. "Oh, well," she said, "I'm not religious, I'm spiritual." So here's what drives me nuts about this exchange, which has happened to me now dozens of times. First of all, when that exchange begins, I know that I'm not going to get to finish my crossword puzzle. Second of all, what drives me crazy is there is a certain delivery with which someone offers that line, "I'm not religious, I'm spiritual." It comes with this sort of smugness and a certain sense that the person really seems to think that by being spiritual but not religious, they're engaged in some kind of daring rebellion against the religious industrial complex. Now, there are so many people in America who describe themselves as spiritual but not religious that there's a sociologist at Columbia who did a whole scientific research study about this phenomenon on people who put themselves into the category of spiritual but not religious. And part of what she found about these folks, all of whom uncannily sit next to me on airplanes, is that most of them like to think about themselves as free thinkers and individuals who are very proud for remaining untethered from quote-unquote organized religion. But for most of the people who nurture their spiritual side, not in churches or synagogues, but instead in a yoga studio or a meditation group or a musical performance combo or a hiking club, most of them reported to this sociologist and her research team that the source of the things that makes them feel spiritual emerge from the same kinds of things that make religious people who do frequently attend services in churches or synagogues, that makes us feel connected, fulfilled, centered, and purposeful. These are things like taking on a regular practice of some sort that happens at predictable intervals in one's week or month, making a commitment to a group of some kind that has certain expectations of you, learning from people, guides or mentors or gurus who came before you, building in quiet time into your life to reflect on the feelings and experiences you've gained and finding ways to integrate them back into your life. What the sociologist found is that no one who takes time or makes time to connect with something higher than themselves, no one who meditates or goes to services or does yoga or strives to come into contact with something higher than themselves, something transcendent in the universe while looking at the mountains, none of us do so in isolation. None of those transcendent, transformative experiences is sui generis. None of them is uniquely our own. None of them, I'm sorry to say, is terribly original at all. The work of growing the Spirit is never only about the self, because there is something intrinsic to the spiritual endeavor that relies upon connection and intersection with the world beyond the self. Even the solitary monk who goes into silent isolation to explore mystical meditations in a cave somewhere, even he does what he does because he is a participant in a monastic tradition, because he learned from the holy teachers who came before him about what to do and how to do it and how to assume his place in the chain of tradition that preceded him. And so this distinction of spiritual but not religious is ultimately meaningless. Because however we nurture the inner self, however we nurture the life of the spirit, there's no enlightenment without connection. There is no inspiration in isolation. The Torah portion that we read this Shabbat describes the construction of the Mishkan that I mentioned to you earlier this evening, that tabernacle, which will be the Israelites' portable sanctuary carried along with them during their sojourn in the wilderness. It's there that they'll pray and bring offerings to God along their long journey toward the Promised Land. In the center of the Mishkan is the Ark of the Covenant, the Israelite people's holiest possession in antiquity, a gleaming gold box which holds the tablets of the law inscribed by God's own hand on top of Mount Sinai. The ark is to be made of wood, which is plated thickly with gold, both inside and out, to demonstrate the precious value of God's words that are stored lovingly inside. The top of the ark is crowned by the Kruvim, two mythical creatures with wings, depicted in sculptures also being made of gold, which are placed on top of the lid of the ark. And the Kruvim are described as being posed facing each other, with their arms stretched forward and the tips of their wings nearly touching each other. There's a small hollow created there between their bodies and the wings and the lid of the ark. And the Torah tells us that it's from inside this hollow space, inside that small, empty area, that God's voice will issue forth when God speaks to the Israelites from inside the tabernacle. So the rabbis ask, why would God choose to speak from that place specifically, from that little space formed from the hollows of a gold statue? The answer comes this way. God chooses to appear there between the Kruvim because their faces are turned to one another. The presence of God is made manifest only when we see each other, face to face. And God's voice emerges most clearly in the space created when people look at each other. God's presence appears most tangibly in the relationships we build with each other and with those who came before us and with those who will follow when we are gone. This is a core religious message of this part of our Torah. At this part in the story, the Israelites have left Mount Sinai behind. They've turned their backs on that dramatic, spectacular scene of revelation, and now they have to move forward. Start walking toward the place where they'll build a sustainable, long-lasting, purposeful society, which is built not on inspiring individual experiences, but on relationships between people. Seems to be teaching us that even the most astonishing and inspiring personal moments of spiritual enlightenment are not enough. What Jewish life asks of us is to come down from the mountain and begin living lives of honest engagement with each other. So let me just offer one last word about this category of those who consider themselves spiritual but not religious, which, as I mentioned earlier, is a category that sociology researcher found many practitioners seeing themselves as having constructed, custom-made, purpose-built inner lives for themselves and by themselves. Earlier, I mentioned the Torah's description of the Holy Ark, the container for the tablets, which was fashioned from wood overlaid with gold. The gold on the outside was very important to our Israelite ancestors. It made the ark more beautiful, and it communicated the worth and value of what was held inside. But the tradition is very clear to point out that even though it might be more valuable, more beautiful to make a box completely out of solid gold, this was forbidden. The core of the ark's construction had to be made out of wood, and furthermore, it had to be made out of a very specific kind of wood, the wood of the acacia tree. So where would acacia trees come from? How would the Israelites have known that they would find them on their long journey from slavery towards redemption and freedom? Well, there's a lovely rabbinic legend that answers that question, and it goes like this. The Israelites knew that they would find those acacia trees growing in the wilderness because their forefather Jacob planted them on his way to Egypt. He planted them because he knew that they would need to be there for his children and grandchildren to find, to use them for holy purpose that he would never live to see. It's a beautiful teaching. And now, centuries upon centuries later, we remember that those who came before us planted their own seeds from which we would benefit. And the things that we plant today will be harvested by those who will follow. That Columbia sociologists' research concluded that there's something uniquely modern about the way that people talk about being spiritual but not religious. It comes with a certain kind of defiance and iconoclasm, which is also deeply and essentially American. It's hard to imagine people in early stages of history or other places around the world describing themselves as spiritual but not religious. We modern Americans are individualists, and we are trendsetters and pioneers, and maybe that's why this category resonates for so many of us. I hope that you will not shy away from calling yourself religious. It's not a scary thing to say, and I think especially for those of us who belong to modern, non-fundamentalist religions, it's extra important for us to be able to say that we are religious people. But even if you can't, even if you feel uncomfortable or uncertain about organized religion, I hope that you will remember this, that every stirring of your spirit, every meaningful and inspiring thing you experience and encounter has come to your hand because even in some arcane and indirect way, you are a recipient of deep and valuable wisdom, of rich and powerful insights that have come from those who came before you. You can choose to embrace them, you can add to them, you can carve away at them and sculpt new meanings out of them. But do not overlook them. Do not forget the trees that were planted by those who came before you, who hoped with all of their hearts that you would find them, take them as your own, and cover them with gold. Shabbat shalom, everybody.